Hello and welcome to Richmond Rising. I'm your host Josh Imhoff and we're here today at the Star Jeanette building. Joining us is Laura Karnes with the Richmond Parks Department. She is the Landscape and Naturalist Leader for the park. Welcome.
Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to be here and talk about plants.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the great work Laura and the Parks Department is doing to promote plants here in Richmond, especially native plants. So, Laura, can you tell us what is a native plant?
Yes, so a native plant by definition is a plant that has evolved in a particular area over time without human intervention. So another way of saying it was that the plant was probably here before humans or European settlement. The native plants have also co-evolved with a lot of the other factors in our environments, including soil conditions, temperature, weather, and then a lot of our insects have co-evolved with these plants as well.
So what's an example of one or two native plants that people out there have probably heard of?
Well, a great native plant for our particular ecoregion is the oak tree. Oak trees are, we were originally 90% forest in Indiana prior to European settlement. So hardwood forest is a really important factor in our ecosystem. Another one that is pretty common for landscaping and in-home gardens, I'd say, would be echinacea or coneflowers. Those are another really popular plant that can serve well in native landscapes.
And as far as the Parks Department is concerned, why natives? Like, what makes natives so valuable to the landscape?
Well, I think that there are a lot of reasons why. I think that natives typically are easier to maintain once established. They, like I said, are adapted to our soil and weather conditions. They typically don't have as many pest problems and don't require as much fertilizer to fix different soil conditions. So, of course, finding the right plant for the right place is really important, but natives provide a lot more to our ecosystem, and I think it's especially important in our Parks Department that it provides us a really good opportunity to connect the citizens and the community with nature in a really positive and beneficial way.
Right. So what kind of recent initiatives has the Parks Department done to connect residents of Richmond to plants using natives?
So pollinator plants and these it's an important process that we make in deciding what plants we're going to use. And one way in which we've done this is kind of using natives in our landscaping around pavilions and shelters, at Springwood Park and in the Springwood Chapel, here at Star Jeanette, the park office, wherever we've been able to plant natives in landscapings, I think is a really good way to show people that it can be something that they do at their house as well without it necessarily looking like a weed, like with it being intentional and having purpose by choosing the right plants. I think another thing is our choice in trees that we've been planting. That's been really important, and even with the annuals, trying to find nectar producing annuals for pollinators, because they can be really beneficial. They're not necessarily native, but they can still have a good impact on the pollinators.
And the pollinators are those insects that sort of co-evolved with the natives, and they're good to have in our parks and in our environment, right?
Exactly. I think that brings up a really important point that a lot of, so plants typically will try to prevent themselves from being eaten, right? So they develop their own toxins and protections so that just not every insect can eat every plant. So those insects that have co-evolved with the native plants typically prefer one or two plants. And a really great example of that a lot of people are familiar with is the monarch butterfly with the milkweed family. So the monarch larvae are hosted on the plant itself. So it's necessary in order for the monarch to reproduce. But there's a lot of different examples of that specialist relationship that is important in the ecosystem. Another one is the zebra swallowtail with pawpaws. So the pawpaw tree is the host for that caterpillar. And without pawpaws, which is a great Indiana tropical fruit, we wouldn't have the zebra swallowtail. So there's the specific examples of how the insects need specific native plants. And we're never necessarily going to be able to restore the ecosystem to what it was, but it's important for us to try to create those functioning relationships between plants and insects.
So we're here at the Star Jeanette building because there's pollinator garden in progress here in the parking lot and along the building. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So this, I believe that the construction was finished for the parking lot at Star Jeanette around 2016, and I joined the Parks Department in 2018, and it was initially installed as a wildflower garden and pollinator garden, but at the time it was just kind of overrun with weeds and noxious weeds, and it's been an evolution and a process for us to try and fix it and restore it to a functioning pollinator garden. This year has been the first year that I felt like it's really kind of turned the corner, and we're able to see the impacts every day by the different insects and animals that are benefiting from the plants here. So it's been one of my biggest headaches in the Parks Department, but I honestly think it's going to be one of the biggest rewards as well. In addition to the people that are already enjoying it, I mean, we've had birders down here. I've seen indigo buntings in the beds, deer, rabbit, monarchs, hummingbird moths. So they are literally buzzing with a lot of activity, both from the citizens and people that appreciate the work that we're trying to do here, and the pollinators themselves. So.
Yeah, it's just lovely to look at, from afar, and then when you get up close and notice the variety of insects and flowers in there, it's just really exciting. What about some of the more natural areas of our parks? You talked about invasive species in there and how they're bad for natives. What do we mean by invasive species, and what has the Parks Department and what have you done to help our parks against invasives?
Yes. So by definition, with an invasive it is a plant that does not belong in a certain place with the potential to outcompete native plants and have a detrimental impact on either the economy or the ecosystem. So not only are they don't belong in this area, but they will cause harm and push out the native plants that are here. We do a lot to try to combat invasives in the parks. Some of the biggest ones that we struggle with or fight are Asian bush honeysuckle, tree of heaven, Japanese knotweed, garlic mustard. There is a couple of new and up-and-coming ones, Lespedeza or sweet clover. Thistle is another really common noxious weed. And what's really important with invasives is knowing the correct control method to try and get rid of them. If you don't know how to kill the plant, then a lot of times efforts are going to be in vain. Most of them require some sort of herbicide treatment in order to prevent them from coming back, and knowing the most effective way and what time of year to do that can be really important. We are focusing primarily on invasives next to waterways. We find it's important. We want to open up our water back to the residents. That's where a lot of bush honeysuckle is, and a lot of invasive plants will tend to come in and take over after there's been disturbance. So, and then also protecting the parts of intact ecosystems that we still have in the parks. So we have a couple really great examples of that. the north end of Springwood is probably the most ecologically diverse, most biodiversity that we have in the parks, and trying to keep the invasives out of that. Also, when we do invasive removal, putting back some kind of seed where we can, or helping to establish some of those native plants back in the area. But Brandon, who is our Trails and Service Leader, he is really great at tackling invasives. He does a lot for the Parks Department, and we're lucky to have him.
Right, that's great. So it just kind of opens up that land to be, colonized by more native plants, or
correct, yes.
By getting rid of them.
Yes, and I think that there is what's called a seed bank. So there's a natural storage of seeds in the soil, and when we remove the invasives, then we give the chance for the native plants to come back and germinate. It's also important to understand that there are successional plants. So after there's been disturbance, you'll have a lot of early successional. That's where natives can come, or invasives can come in and take over. But also like rough dogwood and goldenrod, and sometimes seemingly more undesirable native plants are also just early successional. So they'll come in and get established, and it'll give the time and opportunity for the more high value plants to come in after that. There are a lot of factors that we take into consideration when choosing what plants we put. The light and soil conditions, aesthetic, maintenance needs, pollinator preference, but then also on top of that, there are some really great resources. One of them is the National Wildlife Federation has the keystone plants for ecoregion. So we're in the eastern temperate forest, and they have a list of plants that has the most number of caterpillars that they host, or pollinators that are specific to that plant. So taking that into consideration. And then one other factor that I recently learned about and find it really valuable, it's called a C value for plants. And this is the plant's coefficient of conservatism, which means it's a number on a scale of 0 to 10. Invasives are 0, and really high and rare valuable plants are 10. And that is how likely they were to be in a particular place before settlement. So those are both just kind of interesting factors that if we want to not only plant for pollinators, but plant things that might be rare or endangered or lacking in a lot of other areas in our state, it's ways that we can go about doing that.
That's great. So would like one example of that be the pawpaw in Springwood that you talked about earlier, or what would be a plant with a high C value here in Richmond?
So milkweeds actually do have a very high C value. I think marsh marigold, that's another one that we have at Springwood. It has a high C value. Skunk cabbage, a lot of spring ephemerals. A lot of them are small woodland flowers. And then some of the rare varieties of milkweed. I think serviceberry is another one that's really high value. But I'd have to, I think the list is about 65 pages long.
Oh, wow. Great. But you can consult that when you're looking at a new landscape to figure out what kind of plants we want to put in this area.
Correct.
Before the show, you had said something about caterpillars on oak trees. And it just blew my mind. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So someone that I look up to dearly is Doug Talamy. He's an entomologist and author and researcher, public speaker. He's written a book called The Nature of Oaks, and has brought to light that oaks can host over 400 different species of caterpillars, whereas a ginkgo tree, which is a commonly planted tree in the landscape, it's not invasive, but it doesn't provide a lot back. It hosts only 5. So that's the kind of difference that we're talking about. And then he mentions that a nest of chickadees, a brood of chickadees, takes almost 6,000 caterpillars to raise from the time they're born to leaving the nest. So that's a significant difference when we're talking about our bird population.
Wow. Yeah, just thinking how many how many oak trees, a healthy population of chickadees or similar birds needs, just really puts into perspective that, each extra tree that we can plant and each extra native area that we can have just becomes that much more important.
Absolutely, and I find that another important thing to note is that most of the property in the United States is privately owned. So while the work that we do in the Parks Department is important and valuable, it's not necessarily going to be enough to do the efforts that are needed. In 2016, E.O. Wilson wrote a book called Half Earth, in which he said that we would need to save half the Earth and maintain its ecological function in order to keep the other half. But that's not the case. More than half of the Earth is already in agriculture, and we've paved and developed the rest of it. So I think the point was that public land is not enough, that everybody has the ability to remove the invasives in their property, take out the plants that aren't benefiting back, and then plant natives in their place.
So what can the people of Richmond do to help support natives here locally?
I think that one area where we can make some improvements is reducing the size of lawn that we're mowing, expanding those flower beds a little bit more, and replacing the non-native plants with natives. And that, I think, it's important to remove the invasives and keep the noxious weeds out of the lawn. And then prioritizing those keystone plants that we were talking about, the ones that are really going to benefit the ecosystem back. And another interesting fact that I think that is really easy to do is reducing the amount of light pollution that we create. So insects at night are more drawn to cool light than warm light. So even something as simple as replacing your outdoor bulbs with a warm light instead of cool can help protect the insects at night.
Oh, see, I didn't even think of that. I just thought light bulb, the moths are attracted to it, but by changing the
spectrum
color
of the light, they're more attracted to the cool.
Oh, that's great.
And another, of course, we want to definitely encourage people to stop using pesticides in their lawn. The mosquito treatments are non-discriminant. They will kill all insects. A really effective way, if you have mosquitoes and you want to treat them, is using mosquito dunks or a BT, which is something that will only target the mosquito larvae. So that's a great alternative to having your lawn sprayed for insects, because that's one of the biggest causes of habitat loss, is the use of pesticides.
That's great. That's so important. So I think at this moment we're going to take a break, and then when we come back, Laura's going to get us some up close and personal information about some of the plants here at Star Jeanette, and then also in our more urban downtown. We're here at the Pollinator Garden and the Star Jeanette building, and Laura's going to show us a little closer look at some of the plants here.
So we have a lot of really great different plants in the Pollinator Garden. Some of them are just getting established. We have planted some snowball viburnum bushes to help add some more stature and more biomass. And then we have some penstemon, which is another great native. Recently, about 6 weeks ago, we added a lot of different varieties of native grasses and sedges. So little bluestem, Indian grass, prairie dropseed, side oats grama, several different sedges that are more in the wetter part of the island. There's echinacea in here, monarda. We have the yellow cone flowers and the black-eyed Susans. There are asters and red twig dogwoods, and we've been adding back a lot of Asclepias. A goal of mine is, right now it's pretty monochromatic, a lot of yellow, but my goal is for that to hopefully to change and be very colorful in the future.
Well, thanks for showing us around the Star Jeanette building. Let's take a drive downtown and look at some of the plantings down there.
That sounds great.
So we're here on Main Street, Richmond with Laura to talk about some of the native plantings that the Parks Department handles here.
So we do take care of Main Street from the Star Jeanette entrance up until the theater on 10th Street. And we do our best to try to bring that vibrancy and life to downtown as well. We take care of all the flower pots. We start them in the greenhouse for the Parks Department, usually around February, and then deliver them downtown. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the reasoning behind what we have downtown on Main Street. One concern in dealing with a lot of the problems that street trees face is having enough room for the roots to grow. And there are a couple really unique solutions that are state-of-the-art that come into play when dealing with that. And one of them we have in Richmond from 5th to 7th Street, and that is structural soil. So it's actually compactable gravel that is mixed with soil and an adhesive, and that is underneath the sidewalks and the cycle track so that all of the trees have room for their roots to grow without the risk of the sidewalks upheaving. So that's one really great advancement that kind of deals with the problem that tree pits offer and not really having that longevity of life for street trees. And with that being said, I'm also on the Street Tree Commission for Richmond, and we have a lot of really exciting things that we're looking forward to with our street tree program. We have recently applied for a substantial grant that will be able to do a lot in partnership with the Climate Action Plan that Richmond and the Beat the Heat campaign. We're using all of that information to figure out where in Richmond we need to be planting trees that are going to have the most impact on our citizens in a positive way. And that comes in the form of heating and cooling costs, stormwater runoff, which is another thing I wanted to highlight here on Main Street. That was the intention behind the storm basins that you see behind me, is as an opportunity to collect more of that storm water before it hits our sewer system. So there's a lot of important reasons why we need plants in our urban environments, and trying to prevent that heat island effect and the ecodiversity decline is something that we can do even in the smallest spaces.
So, Laura, what are some of the challenges you have with plants here in the urban landscape?
Well, we do face several challenges. Probably the most obvious one is making sure that we stay ahead of the weeds all the time. Weeds are a never-ending problem, and keeping the invasives out. Another is trash. We spend a significant amount of time picking up trash, especially downtown on Main Street and in Elstro Plaza. And then another unfortunate challenge that we face is vandalism, and that being in the form of intentional plant and tree damage or even theft of plants. So some of the plants that we spend a lot of time in the greenhouse growing and propagating and having a plan for, spend time and effort going out to plant them, and then they are vandalized. It unfortunately is part of something that we have to deal with, and we just try our best to recover and come up with solutions.
Well, I think the parks are a great asset to our community. The plant life here downtown and at Star Jeanette and just all across the city's properties are just an awesome addition that I think people are too often overlook or take for granted, all the hard work you and your team do.
Thank you very much. We try our best to make Richmond beautiful and appreciate it when it's appreciated by those in our community.
Well, great. Well, thank you for sharing that with us today and talking about native plants.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. I love to talk about native plants, and if anyone has any more questions or wants to find out more information, they're more than welcome to contact me at the greenhouse.
All right, this has been Richmond Rising. I'm your host, Josh Imhoff. Thank you for joining.